Hey everybody, welcome to a special video. I'm going to just do an opening video for Suikoden 3. I want to talk a bit about the history, the timeline, the geography and everything, because Suikoden 3 is a bit more confusing on those fronts compared to Suikoden 1 and 2. In Suikoden 1, you didn't need to know any history or geography because it was, well, the first game. The second game, you didn't really need to know the geography, plus you figured out pretty quick in the game, and the history is not all that important. But unfortunately for Suikoden 3, it is very important, and you'll get more out of the game, I believe, at least from my point of view, if you understand the geography and you understand the history. So the first thing I want to start with is history. Now, for people who played Suikoden 1, I believe Suikoden 1 starts in the year 455. I'm not entirely sure about this, but I believe it is. I looked up these dates on Suikosource, so thank you very much, Suikosource. Because the Gate Rune War starts in 453. And I think the war is already going on when Suikoden 1 starts. The character's just not really aware of the war going on, but I believe the game itself starts in 455. And Suikoden 1 ends with the end of the Gate Rune Wars in year 457. Suikoden 2 starts in the year 460 with the Dunan Unification War. Dunan is an area named for the Joustin Republican Highlands, and so that's why it's called the Dunan Unification War. That happens in year 460. Suikoden 3 starts in the year 475. Now you'll notice there's a big jump here. There was only a 3-year gap between Suikoden 1 and 2, and now we have a 15-year gap. That gap is important to remember because we won't see a lot of repeat characters like we do between Suikoden 1 and 2, and it's important to know that gap for the repeat characters we do see. So keep that in mind. Another thing I want to talk about is a bit of history, where Suikoden 3 is going to take place in the grasslands. Well, other countries are involved, but I'm just going to say grasslands for now. And there's a bit of history with the grasslands that I want y'all to know before we get into the game. In the year 407, there was something called the Firebringer War. Now, 407 is way before the other Suikoden games, so this is way back. Grasslands was under attack. I don't remember who it was by, I believe it was Harmonia. And a champion rose to defend the Firelands, and he was called the Firebringer because he had the true fire rune. So he helped defend the grasslands, and the Firebringer War finally ended in the year 425, so it was quite a long war, and the grasslands was pretty much defended. We'll hear more about this in the game, but I just wanted y'all to know how long ago it happened, and it is a very important event to remember that the Firebringer War did happen in the grasslands, because it's very important to the people of the grasslands, and they will talk about it quite a lot. And they don't really explain what they're talking about at first. They just say, oh my gosh, the Firebringer, blah 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 blah, but you're like, what the heck are they talking about? So just keep in mind that this war did happen. They pretty much won the fight, if I recall correctly. I mean, there were losses, but the game will explain that when we get into it. So that's pretty much the history. I mean, obviously a lot more has happened, but just for Suikoden 3, that's basic knowledge I want to give y'all. Moving on to geography, I have a map, and I just basically wanted to explain how we're set up here, because the geography actually makes a difference on why there's a war. Oh, there's other reasons, but there's a big reason why there's a war. So a good part of the game takes place in an area called the grasslands. I'll get into governments and everything later, but I just wanted to show off there is a section called grasslands, and it's rather large, and it's very sparse. To the west of the grasslands is the Zexan Confederacy, or I think they just call it Zexan. I'll just call it Zexan for now. It's a very small country, and, well, I think the country itself is large, but the populated section is quite small. And they're very, 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 very big into trade. You'll see that in the game. Their whole life is based on trade. And a lot of it's based on sea trade, because as you can see here, they're kind of shoved up between the grasslands and the ocean. So they rely very heavily on this. You'll see a small section called the Camaro Free Knights. It's not all important, but good to know where they're located. And then, of course, the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia, or the Harmonium Holy Kingdom, whatever you want to call it. You'll notice on my map there's not much there, because not much is known. You'll notice how large it is. Unfortunately, we don't really know how large it is. I don't want to say it's much larger, but that's smack up against the grasslands. And if you recall in Suikoden 2, Harmonia was also talked about with Highland, because they're very close to Highland. So yeah, I just wanted to show that off because that's important to know the geography, because it can get confusing at first, you know, because there's so many more countries that's mentioned in this game compared to all the others that it is important to understand where they are. And if you're looking at my map, the Dunon Republic it shows there is where we have the Joustin city-states and Highland, and then below that is the Torn Republic, which was the Scarlet Moon Empire in 1, and you don't need to know the rest of the map because that hasn't happened yet in Suikoden games. So yeah, so I just wanted to explain the geography a little so you understand where everyone is. And then I just want to touch a little bit on government. I'm not going to really talk too much about the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia because the game is going to do that for me. The grasslands is a little similar to the city-states in the fact that it's not one giant government, it's a bunch of tribes living together, and each tribe kind of has their own government, but when times of crisis, such as the Firebringer War, they do come together with their leaders, kind of under a single banner, which in that case was the Firebringer, and they do work together. Keep in mind that while the tribes can be drastically different, they all have a deep respect for each other and care about each other, and I don't recall a time where they fight with each other, so it's not like the jerks from Joustin with the Matilda Knights saying, I'm better than you. It doesn't really happen in the grasslands. The Zexans are controlled by a bunch of, I don't really know how to describe it. It's kind of like a council of merchants. They're just a bunch of jerks. That's all I'm going to say. We'll see them in the game. I mean, they have their reasons for things, so don't forget that, but their government is heavily focused on trade and what's best for their trade. They don't really care much about anyone else or anything else. So, yeah. So anyways, I just want to touch on those basic things. I hope this helps. I know it's not much, but at least you have a better idea going into the game what's going on. At the beginning of the game, I just want to say this, though, is Zexan and Grassland don't really get along because the Grasslanders just like nature and they like to just do things on their own, and Zexan is like, we want more land and we want to do whatever we want because we want more money. So just kind of keep that in mind because they don't get along. I mean, nothing huge is going on between them. They're just not very big friends with each other, and you'll see that when we get started in the game. So and before in the video, I've been debating... Oh, no, I guess I do have something else to talk about. So there is another character I want to touch on real quick. His name is Nash. Nash is from Harmonia. He's a spy for Harmonia. Now, the reason I'm telling you guys this is because in Japan, they released 2 other games. They released Suikoden Volume 1 and 2 between the release of Suikoden 2 and 3 in Japan. And so the people, the very lucky people in Japan who got to play these games before Suikoden 3 came out knew who Nash was, so they did not mean for Nash to be a spoiler. So when the poor Americans played the game, they didn't know who Nash was, and I feel like you miss out on it. So I really had a hard time debating whether or not I want to talk about him, but I'm just getting a little tiny bit of background so you know who he is. Like I said, Nash is a spy for the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia, and he was raised in the Howling Voice Guild, so he does have the ability to use guns, but he doesn't like using guns, and he has other weapons at his disposal, but he just doesn't want to use them. And he's a very interesting character, but his loyalties are with the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia, but at the same time, I don't know how strong his loyalty is, to be totally honest, but I just want to let y'all know who he is and where he's from. And generally, he's sent out to do reconnaissance missions. In the game's Suikoden Volume 1 and 2, he's actually sent out to go investigate the True Runes during the events of Suikoden 2. And the games are extremely interesting if you're interested in the story of Suikoden 2. I highly recommend going and finding an LP if you haven't heard about them, because they actually explain why Luke is such a jerk, and they talk about the history of Necklord and Sierra. It's very interesting, but that's pretty much what he's sent out to do. So I just want y'all to know about him in case he's mentioned or he shows up in Suikoden 3. And the one last thing I was thinking about originally was, I know I've had a lot of my viewers ask me why I complain about Suikoden 3, and it's because I feel like Suikoden 3 has a very horrible cliffhanger at the end. And if you're just playing the game and barely paying attention, you won't notice the cliffhanger, in all honesty. So I just want to remind you guys of a couple events and keep them in the back of your mind while you're playing Suikoden 3 so you can catch on to what I'm talking about. I don't want to tell y'all outright because it might ruin Suikoden 3. And it'll help explain the outrage from the viewers and... not viewers, why did I say that? The fans of the Suikoden series when Suikoden 4 came out. So don't forget that in Suikoden 1, we had Wendy who was trying to gather the true runes. Like in this case, it was Ted's rune, the Soul Eater. If you catch her very briefly during the game, she'll mention that her interest partially interests the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia. It is very fleeting and very short, and most people don't catch it. And in Suikoden 2, you'll recall that a character named Sasarai, comes from the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia to help Highland, and their interest is also about true runes. In fact, they even lend a true rune to Highland to help them look for true runes. And if you recall, Highland mentions they don't really care, but in the interest of the alliance with Harmonia, they're willing to turn over any true runes they find. Again, this is reading between the lines of the discussions the characters has, but this does occur. So I just want to just remind y'all that in the past 2 games, Harmonia has come up around the idea of these true runes. Now, nothing's happened, but the fact that they're there and they're interested in the true runes is very important to remember for the coming events of Suikoden 3. And of course to know why people were really, really angry when Suikoden 4 came out. Which hopefully when I get to that game you'll understand why. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you guys enjoy our upcoming LP of Suikoden 3. Bye for now.